No one in the village understood what the boy was doing that morning, and by sunset, they would never look at him the same way again. The wind was sharp that day, cutting through the broken wooden fences of the abandoned stable at the edge of town. Inside, a wild horse stood trembling, not from fear alone, but from exhaustion so deep it looked like the animal had forgotten what peace felt like. Its ribs showed like broken lines under its coat, and its eyes, those eyes were not just tired. They were waiting for something that never came. Outside the stable, a boy no older than 12 stood holding something tightly in his hands. It was his only possession of value, a small, worn-out toy horse carved from wood. The paint had faded years ago, one of its legs was chipped, but to him, it was everything. The last memory of his father, who once told him, even the weakest horse can carry the strongest heart. But today, hunger had a louder voice than memory. The boy swallowed hard as he looked at the real horse inside the stable. Every instinct told him to walk away. People had warned him, that animal is dangerous, broken, not worth saving. But something in the horse's silence felt different. It wasn't wild anger he saw. It was surrender. And that scared him more than anything. Behind him, footsteps approached. An old caretaker from the village farm, a man who had spent his entire life around animals, stopped a few feet away. He noticed the boy's trembling hands immediately. "You shouldn't be here," the man said quietly. "That horse doesn't trust anyone anymore." The boy didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked on the stable. Because in that moment, he made a decision that would change everything. Slowly, painfully, he stepped forward and placed his wooden toy on a rock outside the stable. The caretaker frowned. "What are you doing?" The boy's voice cracked. "He hasn't eaten in days. I heard them say he won't survive another night. I have nothing else." The caretaker looked confused. "That toy won't feed him." But the boy wasn't listening anymore. He walked to the back of the farm where a small storage shed stood half-collapsed. Inside, there was a single sack of horse feed, the caretaker's reserve for emergencies. The boy knew this was wrong. He knew he would be punished. But hunger doesn't understand rules. Neither does desperation. With shaking arms, he dragged the sack across the dirt, each step heavier than the last, until he reached the stable again. The wild horse had backed into the corner now, muscles tight, eyes locked on him like he was another danger. The caretaker rushed forward. "Stop. You don't understand what that animal." But the boy raised his hand, stopping him. For a moment, everything froze. The wind slowed. Even the horse stopped moving. The boy pushed the sack just inside the stable. Then he did something no one expected. He stepped inside with it. The caretaker gasped. "Get out. That horse will attack you." But the boy didn't move. He knelt slowly, placing the food on the ground, his voice barely a whisper. "I know you don't trust me," he said. "But I know what it feels like to be hungry and forgotten." The horse's ears twitched. A silence stretched between them, heavy, fragile, dangerous. Then, a step. The horse moved forward. Not aggressively, not wildly, but cautiously, as if the idea of trust itself was painful. The boy didn't move. He didn't breathe loudly. He just stayed still, tears forming in his eyes as the horse came closer, closer, until it stood just a few feet away from him. For the first time in weeks, the horse lowered its head and began to eat. The caretaker behind them whispered in shock, "Impossible." But something even stranger happened next. As the horse ate, it stopped suddenly, lifted its head, and looked not at the food, but at the boy's empty hands, as if it was searching for something else. The wooden toy. Outside the stable. The horse took one slow step forward, then another. And without warning, it turned and walked out of the stable completely, straight toward the toy. The boy stood up, heart pounding, confused and afraid. "Wait," he whispered. But the horse didn't stop. And what it did next would mark the beginning of something no one in that village could ever explain. The moment the horse stepped out of the stable, everything changed. The caretaker froze behind them, unable to speak, as if the air itself had tightened around his lungs. A starving wild horse, known for rejecting every human attempt at contact, was now walking steadily toward a broken wooden toy lying on a rock. The boy's heart hammered in his chest. "Stop," he whispered again, but this time it wasn't a command. It was fear. Not fear of the horse, but fear of what it meant if the horse actually understood something no one else did. The wind picked up again, rustling through dry grass. The horse stopped in front of the toy. For a long moment, it didn't move. It just stared at the small wooden figure as if it recognized something buried deep in memory. Then, slowly, it lowered its head. The caretaker muttered behind them, "This animal, it's not normal." The boy didn't respond. He couldn't. His eyes were fixed on the horse's trembling breath as it nudged the toy gently with its nose. And then something happened that no one expected. The horse stepped back. Not away from danger, but as if it was remembering. A strange silence followed, heavy and unnatural. Even the birds had stopped calling. Then suddenly, the horse turned its head sharply toward the distant hills beyond the village, and let out a low, broken sound. Not a neigh, not a roar. Something in between, like a cry that had been held back for too long. The boy felt it in his chest. Pain. Grief. Something ancient and unspoken. The caretaker stepped closer, his voice uneasy. "I've seen wild horses before, but this one, it's searching for something." The boy swallowed. Or someone. That thought alone sent a chill through him. The horse began walking again. This time faster. Not running, but purposeful. As if it had finally decided where it needed to go. Without thinking, the boy followed. "Don't," the caretaker shouted. "You don't know where it's leading you." But the boy didn't stop. He couldn't. Because something inside him, something he didn't understand, told him that if he didn't follow now, he would lose something far more important than fear. The horse led them past the edge of the village, where the land turned dry and uneven. Old rocks jutted out like broken bones from the earth. The caretaker hesitated at the boundary. "This is abandoned land," he warned. "No one goes there anymore." But the boy was already moving forward. The horse never looked back. Hours seemed to pass. The sun shifted lower in the sky, casting long golden shadows over the land. The boy's legs burned, but he didn't stop. Something about the horse's movement felt urgent now, like it was racing against time itself. Finally, they reached an old broken bridge over a shallow ravine. The horse stopped. For the first time since leaving the stable, it looked back. At the boy. Not the caretaker. Only the boy. Their eyes met. And in that moment, something unexplainable passed between them. Trust. Or something close to it. Then the horse turned and stepped onto the bridge. Halfway across, the wood creaked dangerously. The caretaker shouted, "It's going to collapse." But the horse didn't slow down. And then, crack. One of the planks broke. The horse stumbled. The boy screamed without thinking, "No." And something incredible happened. The horse stopped falling. It balanced itself. As if it had heard him. As if it had chosen to listen. Step by step, it crossed the rest of the bridge safely. The boy exhaled shakily, his hands trembling. The caretaker shook his head in disbelief. That animal should have fallen. But the boy wasn't listening anymore. Because on the other side of the bridge, the horse had stopped again. This time, staring at something in the distance. A structure. Old. Half collapsed. Hidden between cliffs and overgrown trees. A barn. But not an ordinary one. The wood was blackened by time. The doors hung open like broken jaws. And strange markings were carved into the beams, symbols the boy had never seen before. The horse took one step closer. Then another. And suddenly stopped. Its entire body went rigid. The boy felt it too. A pressure in the air. Like the place was holding a memory it refused to release. The caretaker whispered from behind, almost in fear now, "That place was sealed years ago. No one knows what happened there." The boy asked quietly, "What is it?" But the caretaker didn't answer. Because the horse had begun to shake. Not from weakness. From recognition. It let out another sound, louder this time. Echoing through the empty land like a wound reopening. And then, without warning, it turned and ran straight toward the barn. The boy's eyes widened. Wait! But the horse was already gone. Inside. And from within the dark structure, came a sound that made the boy's blood run cold. Not fear. Not anger. Something worse. A response. Something inside that barn had heard the horse. And it was answering back. The sound from inside the barn didn't echo like normal noise. It stayed, hanging in the air like something alive. The boy stood frozen at the entrance, his breath shallow, his eyes locked on the dark opening where the horse had disappeared. The caretaker grabbed his shoulder tightly. "Don't go in there," the old man warned, voice shaking now. "That place is not safe, not for you, not for anything living." But the boy could hear it again. A soft movement. Hooves. Inside the darkness. And something else. Breathing. Slow. Controlled. Almost patient. The boy's heart pounded so hard it hurt. Then, from inside the barn, came the horse's sound again. Lower now, calmer, but filled with something deeper than fear. Recognition. The boy stepped forward. "Wait," the caretaker hissed. "If you go in there." But the boy had already crossed the threshold. The moment he entered, the world outside felt far away. The barn was colder than it should have been, like the air itself had been trapped here for years. Dust floated in slow motion through narrow beams of light cutting from broken roof planks. And then he saw it. The horse stood in the center. Completely still. Facing something in front of it. A second horse. The boy's eyes widened in disbelief. It wasn't wild like the first one. Its body was weaker, older, but not alone. There were traces of rope marks around its legs, old injuries healed poorly, and its eyes carried something devastating. Hope that had been buried, and never returned. The caretaker appeared at the entrance, whispering in shock, "No, that horse was lost years ago." The boy turned sharply. "Lost?" The caretaker nodded slowly, voice heavy. "This barn belonged to a breeder who disappeared after a fire. Some horses escaped, others were never found." The boy looked back at the two horses. And something clicked inside him. The wild horse he had followed wasn't lost. It was searching. For this one. The injured horse stepped forward weakly, its legs trembling. The wild horse didn't move at first. It just stared. Then, slowly, it lowered its head. The same way it had in the stable earlier. Not submission. Not fear. Something closer to relief. The boy felt his throat tighten. "They know each other," he whispered. The caretaker shook his head slowly. "No, that's impossible. That horse was never seen again." But the boy wasn't listening anymore. Because the injured horse had begun to move. Step by painful step. And as it got closer, the wild horse did something no one expected. It stepped back. Making space. As if it had been carrying something for years, and finally decided to give it back. The two horses touched. Nose to nose. And the barn filled with a sound unlike anything the boy had ever heard. Not a cry. Not a roar. Something like, release. A weight finally lifted. The wild horse let out a deep breath, its body shaking, and for the first time since the boy met it, it looked peaceful. But then something strange happened. The injured horse turned its head slowly, and looked directly at the boy. The boy stepped back instinctively. The caretaker whispered, "It sees you." "What does that mean?" the boy asked. But no one answered. Because the wild horse suddenly moved again. Not toward the injured horse. Not toward escape. Toward the back of the barn. The boy followed its gaze and saw it. A small wooden door hidden behind collapsed beams. Half buried. The kind of door no one would notice unless they were searching for something specific. The horse approached it and stopped. The barn went silent. Even the caretaker stopped breathing. The boy felt it too. Something behind that door wasn't just hidden. It was waiting. The wild horse turned its head toward the boy again. And this time, it didn't move alone. It waited. As if asking him to come closer. The boy's hands shook. "I don't understand," he whispered. But his feet were already moving. Step by step. Closer to the door. The injured horse made a soft sound behind him, almost like a warning or a farewell. The caretaker shouted, "Don't open it." But the boy had already placed his hand on the wood. And at that exact moment, the door shifted slightly. From the other side, something pushed back. Alive. Inside. Waiting. And then, a sound came through the cracks. A sound that made both horses go completely still. A voice. Human. Weak. Barely alive. The boy's breath caught. Because whatever was inside that locked space, it wasn't just part of the past. It was still there. And it knew them. The sound didn't just come through the wood. It pressed through it. Like it had been trapped for too long and was finally breaking apart. The boy stood frozen with his hand still on the door. His heartbeat was so loud he could barely hear anything else. Behind him, the caretaker was repeating something. Warning, praying, maybe both, but it all blurred into the background. Because the voice came again. Closer this time. Weak, trembling, but unmistakably human. Help. The word barely survived the air. The wild horse stepped forward immediately. Not cautiously this time. Urgently. Its body stiffened as it stood beside the boy, staring at the door like it understood every crack in it. The injured horse behind them shifted uncomfortably, letting out a low sound, almost like distress. The boy swallowed hard. There's someone inside. The caretaker shook his head violently. That barn has been abandoned for years. No one could survive in there. But even as he said it, his voice lost certainty. Because the voice came again. Please. This time clearer. This time closer. The boy looked at the wild horse. You knew this place. The horse didn't move. But it didn't deny it either. The boy's fingers tightened on the door edge. Something inside him, fear, curiosity, something stronger, pushed him forward. I'm opening it, he whispered. The caretaker stepped forward instantly. If you open that and something is wrong. I have to, the boy interrupted. Silence fell. Even the wind outside seemed to stop. Then slowly, the boy pulled. The wooden door groaned like it had been holding its breath for years. Dust burst outward in a thick cloud. For a moment, nothing could be seen. Only darkness inside. Then, a sound. A cough. Real. Human. The boy stepped forward instinctively, the wild horse right behind him. And what he saw made his knees weaken. Inside the small hidden space was a man. Or what was left of one. Thin. Exhausted. Barely holding himself upright against the wall. Chains, rusted, broken in places, still hung loosely around his wrist and ankle, as if they had once held him down but time had weakened them more than escape ever could. The caretaker gasped. No, that's impossible. The man lifted his head slowly. His eyes met the boy's. And something flickered in them. Recognition. The boy stepped back slightly. Who are you? The man tried to speak, but his voice cracked. I stayed with them. The wild horse stepped forward suddenly. The man's eyes shifted instantly toward it. And the entire barn seemed to shift with that moment. The injured horse made a soft sound again, almost like it was answering him. The man whispered, tears forming in his eyes. You came back. The wild horse lowered its head. And in that instant, everything became clear. The boy turned slowly to the caretaker. You said horses escaped, but he said he stayed. The caretaker looked pale. He was the trainer, years ago. Before the fire. We thought he was gone. The man shook his head weakly. Not gone, trapped. He raised a trembling hand, pointing toward the injured horse. They didn't leave me. I didn't leave them. The boy felt something heavy settle in his chest. A truth buried under years of silence. The barn hadn't just been abandoned. It had been sealed. The wild horse stepped closer to the man, pressing its head gently against his shoulder. The man broke completely. Silent tears. Exhausted breaths. I waited, he whispered. Every day. The injured horse moved closer too, slowly lowering itself beside him as if afraid it might break him if it moved too fast. The boy stood there, unable to speak. Because he finally understood something. The horse outside, the one he had followed. It hadn't been lost. It had been searching for the man. And the man had been waiting for them. The caretaker whispered, almost ashamed now, "We thought the fire destroyed everything. We closed the land, we forgot what was inside." The boy looked at him sharply. "You didn't forget. You abandoned it." The caretaker said nothing. The silence confirmed it. A long moment passed. Then the wild horse turned its head toward the exit. Not leaving. Not escaping. Inviting. The boy looked at it. Then at the man. Then at the injured horse. Something was about to change again. The man spoke softly, barely audible. "They don't belong in here anymore." The boy nodded slowly. "Then we take them out." The caretaker stepped forward quickly. "That's impossible. The land outside." But the boy interrupted again, his voice steadier now. "They already survived impossible." The wild horse let out a soft breath, almost like agreement. And then it did something unexpected. It walked toward the boy. And stopped. Waiting. Not for food. Not for command. For trust. The boy slowly raised his hand and placed it on the horse's neck. The first real contact. Warm. Alive. Real. The caretaker watched, stunned. And for the first time, he didn't interrupt. Outside, the light was fading. But inside the barn, something new was beginning. A decision. A journey back. And a promise that whatever had been lost in that place was not finished yet. Because the horse had not brought the boy here by accident. It had brought him here for a reason. And that reason was finally waking up. The moment the boy stepped out of the barn, the world outside felt different. Not because the land had changed, but because he had. Behind him, the wild horse followed first. Then the injured horse, carefully, slowly, as if every step was relearning what freedom felt like. And finally, the man, leaning heavily on the caretaker for support, blinking against the fading sunlight like he had forgotten what open sky looked like. The wind moved through the empty fields again, but this time it didn't feel cold. It felt alive. The caretaker whispered, almost in disbelief, "I never thought I would see them outside that place again." The boy didn't answer immediately. His hand was still resting on the wild horse's neck, as if afraid that letting go might undo everything. But something still didn't feel finished. The wild horse suddenly stopped walking. Everyone else froze too. Its ears turned sharply toward the distant hills again, the same direction it had looked before, back when the journey began. The boy noticed it instantly. "What is it now?" The man lifted his head weakly. "It's still searching." The caretaker frowned. "Searching for what?" No one answered. Because the horse already started moving again. But this time, it wasn't just leading. It was guiding. The group followed through uneven terrain until they reached a shallow valley the boy had never seen before. The grass here grew thicker, greener, untouched by time. It felt wrong, like a secret the world had decided to hide. And in the center of it, a collapsed wooden shelter. Not a barn. Not ruins of fire. Something different. Something older. The wild horse stopped directly in front of it. The injured horse stood beside it. And then both of them went still. The man suddenly whispered, his voice shaking, "This is where it began." The caretaker looked confused. What began? But the boy already felt it. Something in the air had changed again. He stepped forward slowly, pushing aside broken wood. And beneath it was a small, faded carving. A symbol. The same one from the abandoned barn. The boy turned to the man. "What is this place?" The man's eyes filled with emotion he could barely hold back. "A place we built for them," he said softly. "Before everything went wrong." The wind shifted. And for a moment, it felt like the past was standing right there with them. The man continued, "We trained horses here. Not to control them, but to understand them. The wild one you followed, he was never meant to be broken. He was meant to guide." The boy looked at the horse in shock. "You mean, he chose me?" The wild horse turned its head slightly toward him. No fear. No confusion. Only recognition. The man nodded slowly. "When the fire happened, I couldn't save them all. I was trapped. The others thought I died. The horses scattered. But this one, he placed a trembling hand on the wild horse's neck, he never forgot. A long silence followed. Even the wind seemed to listen. The caretaker stepped forward, shaken. So everything we believed was wrong. The man looked at him gently. Not wrong. Just incomplete. The injured horse let out a soft sound and leaned closer to the man, as if forgiving him for time lost. The boy felt something rise in his chest, heavy and warm at the same time. He looked at the wild horse again. You led me here, not to show me a place. The horse didn't move. The boy's voice softened. But to bring them home. For the first time, the wild horse closed its eyes. A quiet acceptance. The man knelt slowly, placing both hands on the ground, overwhelmed. I thought I lost them forever. The boy stepped closer. But you didn't. He looked at all of them, man, caretaker, horses, broken land, and something inside him finally made sense. You were all just waiting for someone to find you again. The sun dipped lower, painting the valley in gold. And in that light, something incredible happened. The wild horse stepped forward and gently nudged the boy, not away, but forward, toward the open field. The boy hesitated, then walked. And the horse followed beside him. Not behind him. Beside him. The injured horse and the man stayed back for a moment, watching. Then slowly followed too. The caretaker whispered, almost to himself, this isn't just rescue anymore. The man nodded. It's healing. As they moved together across the valley, something changed in the boy's expression. The emptiness he once carried wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with something new. Trust. Connection. Purpose. And behind them, the wild horse let out one final sound. Not a cry of pain, not a call of search. But something closer to peace. Because the miracle wasn't just that the boy saved the horse. It was that the horse had led the boy to everything that was lost, and brought it back to life. And in that moment, the world didn't feel broken anymore. It felt found.